The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. So, one of the best books that I wound up reading last year actually turned out to be Atlas Shrugged. You know, I noticed that my year end best and worst of video got some dislikes, and I would bet money that this book being on the best list might have had something to do with that. But be that as it may, Atlas Shrugged really impacted me like very few books do. It hit me like a train, pun intended, because trains are a major motif in the book. And you know, some viewers out there might find that kind of curious because if you followed my channel, you might say, but you've read like Nietzsche and Wittgenstein and Kant, like you've read serious, like academically accepted works of philosophy, and you're going to say that you think that this weird little fringe philosophy over here actually has real value? Yes, I do. I think that this book has quite a bit of value to it. The things that Atlas Shrugged showed me, I feel truly indebted to it for. Not to go too deeply off into it here, but I will say that prior to reading Atlas Shrugged, I kind of tended more towards a like relativistic moral outlook, but not after reading Atlas Shrugged. Oh no, after reading this book, I'll say if morality is not objective, it is a damn sight closer to it than a lot of people, my former self included, might think. As well, it showed me some things I think about the nature of good and evil and just how small and pathetic evil actually is if you could see it as it actually is. And also, there's a scene in this book that I have thought about so freaking much since reading it. Again, I'm not going to really go off into it here, but needless to say, I really do think that Atlas Shrugged has quite a bit of value to it. And really, at this point, all I have to do to convince myself of that is turn on the news. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but the current administration here in America, which will not be named because I have the sneaking suspicion that if I do name it, this video might get flagged and shadow banned. But the current administration here in America is quite literally like some freaking Ayn Rand villains. I mean, they are the perfect fusion of pathetic and diabolical. And as Atlas Shrugged showed me, there may not exist as great of a distinction between those two things as you might think. But before Atlas Shrugged ever was, there was The Fountainhead. Now, The Fountainhead was published, I think, in 1943, and it was Ayn Rand's first major literary success. She had published a couple books before that. As well, she had done a little work in theater, but really she had not had a great degree of success. But The Fountainhead changed that. It launched her into a state of prominence in the landscape of American letters, much to the chagrin of many people, I'm sure. But what is The Fountainhead actually about? I'm going to tell you all about it, and I'm going to spoil it. So if you don't want The Fountainhead spoiled, leave now, I guess, because you have been warned. So The Fountainhead has a rather expansive plot. And it covers like, I think like 15 years of time. And so I'm going to do my best to summarize it because it is a long book, y'all. It is a very long book. It's like around 700 pages long. It's a thick one, but I'm going to do my best to summarize all the ground that it covers because it really does cover quite a bit. So it takes place in the early 1900s. Howard Rourke, our central character, is an intransigent young architect who does not conform to the standards of his time. He is, I guess, what you call like a modernist architect. He has no real respect for past conventions such as like Renaissance or Rococo architecture. He is a man of vision. He is dead set on designing structures and buildings as he wants to. But this sets him at odds with the architectural institution of his day. And so he is expelled from the architectural academy at which he is a student in the beginning, alongside another architect named Peter Keating. Now, Peter Keating and Rourke, their paths cross many times throughout the rest of the book, but it should suffice to say here at the beginning that Howard Rourke is a very, very, very good architect. He, like I said, is a real man of vision. He's able to, design things based on kind of new ideals and such, whereas Peter Keating is the exact opposite. He has some ability, but he doesn't have much aptitude. He doesn't have much talent. He kind of just coasts along by getting helped by Howard Rourke, and also with a whole load of ass kissing, because that is kind of the way, as Ayn Rand asserts, that people like Peter Keating succeed and rise in the world when they don't have actual talent. It's just brown nosing, right? So Howard Rourke sets out to become an architect kind of behind the eight ball because he was expelled from the architectural academy, and no one really responds that well to his designs, but he will not compromise his vision. No amount of money will force him or convince him to design a building or structure or anything as he does not want to do it. He is committed to himself. Anyway, so Peter Keating quickly rises in the world of architecture, and Howard Rourke kind of just languishes on the fringes. But eventually, through some breaks that he gets, he does start to gain some traction in the industry and to kind of gain a certain level of prominence. And this causes him to run afoul of Ellsworth Toohey, who is the villain of the work, a devious socialist intellectual who is very, very deftly and very, very subtly in the process of working to mold the public consciousness through media, because he's a newspaper columnist and like a writer, towards like a much more left-leaning socialistic outlook. My, where have I seen that before? You might say this is a little bit prescient. Actually, it's a lot prescient. But anyway, so after seeing that Howard Rourke will not conform or bow to the will of the masses, Ellsworth Toohey eventually decides that he is going to kind of attack Rourke's career through the medium of the newspaper he writes for. And also writing for this same newspaper is a young woman named Dominique Francone, who is also a woman of vision, much like Rourke, but she is also very, very cynical and has a very pessimistic outlook on the world in which she lives. She is very committed to greatness, but she also knows that greatness is very, very exceedingly rare, and also rarely goes unpunished because of the inferiority of others. So she has kind of resigned herself to living in a world that doesn't meet her own standards. But when she runs into Rourke and they strike up a romance, a very rough and kind of quasi-rapey romance, because it wouldn't be an Ayn Rand book if there wasn't some rough, slightly kinky sex in there. But so she falls in love with Rourke because they are kindred spirits. They are both, like I said, people of vision who are committed to greatness and will make no quarter for inferiority or weakness. But because of her kind of cynicism, she sees that Rourke is kind of like a lost cause in the world, that the world is just going to beat him down, hammer him to a pulp because they will not abide his vision, his ideals. So she kind of ironically sets about trying to tear him down as well, along with Ellsworth Toohey. because she views Rourke as being too good for this world, that she has to destroy him before the world does, I guess. So he has a rough time of it. But as he keeps going, he just through sheer perseverance and force of will, he hangs in there, and his reputation continues to grow. Dominique, his lover, who is kind of again oddly at odds with him, eventually marries the incompetent boob Peter Keating, but that doesn't last long because she eventually leaves him to marry Gail Wynand, who is the 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 media tycoon who owns the newspaper that she and Ellsworth Toohey uh, write for. And Gail Wynand is a man of almost greatness. He is very similar to Howard Rourke, but he, unlike Rourke, compromised his ideals in order to win public favor as well as for material gain. And so his greatness, whatever potential he had for greatness, has been squandered, but it has led him to have a rather sizable media empire. So she marries him. Eventually, Peter Keating's career starts to kind of plummet because it becomes apparent that ass kissing will only get you so far, and that's no substitute for actual talent. So Keating comes to Rourke and asks him to help him design a housing complex for a government contract that he stands to win if he can design the best layout. So Rourke helps him, and then Rourke is like, "I'll do it if you promise that it will be built exactly to my specifications." And so Keating is like, "Yes, I'll do it." So Rourke helps him get the contract, but wouldn't you know it, they mangle his vision and turn it into something that he can't stand. So Rourke enlists the help of Dominique, and he dynamites the structure. He destroys it, and then he is arrested, and it culminates in the climax of the book in a grand trial in which Rourke basically stands alone against the world and makes a grandiloquent speech about the value of personal integrity and how no one is entitled to corrupt the vision of another, and how he is entitled to have his work executed as he sees it, and how the vast majority of humanity are secondhand parasites which are feeding off of while simultaneously despising the greatness of a select few. And he wins over the jury and he is acquitted. And then the book ends with he and Dominique, now Mrs. Rourke, on a skyscraper which he is erecting, which should be the most um, lofty and the tallest building ever constructed in the world. And that's how it ends. That is the Fountainhead, insofar as I can kind of summarize it, because, like I said, it covers a lot of ground and it's kind of labyrinthine at times. But yeah, so that's the Fountainhead. Let's talk about the technical aspects of the book. Now, the writing of the Fountainhead is good. It's better than good at times. And here's the thing: uh, Ayn Rand is one of the most maligned of philosophers and intellectuals and writers, but you can disagree with her ideas all you want. But I'm here to tell you she is one of the most grossly overhated writers because this is not in any way a badly written book. This is truly a very well written book. She could write, y'all. I mean, however you feel about the ideas she promoted, like she could promote them very, very eloquently as this book evinces, because The Fountainhead is a very well written book. The prose is truly kind of poetic at times, especially in kind of the way that she lavishes description on the buildings and facades and various structures that Rourke erects over the course of the story. Now, I will say there are some issues with punctuation in this. There were a lot of times, I mean, a lot of times in the book where there were commas where there did not need to be commas. Like it kind of jumped out at me just how many times uh, commas were misused and like wrongly inserted, or at least I think wrongly inserted, that made the sentences read kind of weirdly. But as to the actual wording of the sentences, the actual like syntax of it, it's fine. It is a more than competently written book. Um, so yeah, the writing I don't really have much to complain about. But now let's talk about the characters. Now, the characters in an Ayn Rand book are probably going to be the most striking feature because of how different they are, not only from probably any characters that you've ever read in any other books, but also probably different from the majority of people that you've ever encountered. But before going into that, I do want to say this. The Fountainhead, it may not be totally, but it is at least somewhat of a romaniclef. It is a novel where the characters are kind of in some ways based on, or at least inspired by, real life figures, right? Like Howard Roark is based, or again, at least inspired by, to some degree, the real life architect Frank Lloyd Wright. And like one of the buildings, the houses that he designs in this is kind of like, sounds kind of reminiscent of Falling Water, right? Um, and Ellsworth Toohey is based on the British Labour politician Harold Laski, I believe. Gail Wynand is directly based on William Randolph Hearst, and of course Dominique Franconi is basically just Ayn Rand herself. But these characters are definitely different than a lot of the way that other books would handle characters. The characters in Ayn Rand books, at least the protagonists, don't really have arcs. They kind of just are what they are from the start, and they finish that way. But that doesn't mean that they're not well rendered, that they're not interesting and sufficiently fleshed out to be perspicuous, at least. Howard Roark is definitely a very singular individual, and as Ayn Rand says in the foreword to this, the book is not really concerned with portraying life as it is in some ways. It's really wanting to try to portray life as it should be or ought to be. And Howard Roark is Ayn Rand's ideal man. He is a dogged, like die-hard individualist who will not compromise himself or his ideals in any way, even if he starves. He is also incredibly competent and sharp, and he does not need the validation or approval of anybody other than himself. And yeah, that's his character. But it is fascinating, and really, I mean, you're kind of, you respect it, because like if you really were to meet somebody like that in real life, if you're honest, you would respect them. If you're not honest, you would probably be intimidated by them, but you would remember them, because if you really saw someone that is that complete in themselves, to the extent where you're basically just a bug on their windshield, you would remember that person probably. And Howard Roark is a very memorable character. Dominique Francone is also a very memorable character, again, because she's basically just Ayn Rand herself. Um, but she has a very interesting personality, very masochistic personality. Oh, trust me, after reading Atlas Shrugged, masochism is a major theme in the writings of Ayn Rand, it seems. But Dominique Francone is trying to like punish herself because she doesn't really feel like she deserves happiness so much, because um, not only does the world not meet her standards, but she thinks that what does meet her standards, like Rourke, is kind of too good for the world, if that makes sense. It gets kind of melodramatic at times, but overall it works, and it's kind of compelling, honestly. And Peter Keating is also that's a pretty realistic character. I think, a lot of people can probably relate to knowing someone like Peter Keating, someone who just kind of rises based on ass kissing and brown nosing rather than any actual um, aptitude or ability of their own. And I think that's probably a really realistic character in this, honestly. And then Gail Wyman, the media magnate, is kind of the counterpoint to Rourke in some ways. He uh, was capable of real greatness because he also, like Rourke, is dedicated to greatness and is also very competent. But along the way, he sold out because he allowed the world to have too much sway over him, and so he eventually sold out his own ideals, and so he squandered his greatness, as Ayn Rand posits through the book. And also, um, the, uh, the character of uh, Ellsworth Toohey is not only a perfect villain for this work, he is uh, one of the finest villains I think I have ever read in any book. He is very, very sinister, but under a kind of mask of gaiety and goodwill. But the character of Ellsworth Toohey in this is kind of like the perfect foil to Howard Rourke, right? I mean, he is everything that Howard Rourke isn't. He is has no real qualities of his own except his ability to kind of poison people's minds. He is not nearly as capable as Howard Rourke. Like Howard Rourke is like the Sigma male, kind of like Giga Chad character, and then Ellsworth Toohey is like the kind of pathetic whelp who is just nipping at the heels of Rourke. But it works, and the level of like danger that this character of Ellsworth Toohey actually exhibits over the course of the book is very, very palpable, and it's very effective as well. But by and large, the characters are they're interesting. Now, however, you might say they're maybe not the most like they don't have arcs necessarily, and in some cases they might not be that realistic. But yeah, they're interesting. I kind of view Ayn Rand's characters as kind of related in a way to like Charles Dickens's characters. Like Dickens wrote larger than life, really memorable characters who also weren't maybe necessarily the most well rounded, but you definitely remembered their personalities. And the characters in this book are kind of like that. But they work. It's interesting. It kept me hooked, and you do understand them, and I guess that's the important thing. So the characters are fine, I think. Oh, and now as to the story of this is, um, I will say, a much better book than Atlas Shrugged. Like Atlas Shrugged hit me harder than this book did. But speaking objectively in terms of like literary value, The Fountainhead is a vastly better book because even though Atlas Shrugged really kind of hit me with a lot of its ideas. Those ideas aren't necessarily woven into the story in the most elegant fashion. Of course, if you've read the book or if you're familiar with Atlas Shrugged, you'll know there is a 70-page monologue in towards the end of the book where Ayn Rand just kind of megaphones her views through the mouth of a character. But the Fountainhead is not like that. It is much more organic in its constitution. The ideas of individualism versus collectivism are much more uh, finely woven in there. But yeah, the story is much better integrated with the ideas than Atlas Shrugged was. It's not like megaphoning as much. Like, okay, when you get to the end of the book, the climax with the courtroom speech, okay, that is. But up until that, it's much more um, subtle. There is some actual subtlety in the Fountainhead. It's not, again, quite as much of a megaphone uh, sense as Atlas Shrugged had. So yeah, the story it's definitely long. It is, but really it makes good use of the length, and I don't really know if there's a lot in there that I would have cut or that could have been cut. It justifies its size, I think. So yeah. Now, um, to rate the Fountainhead, I'm going to give the Fountainhead an A. I am. With Atlas Shrugged, I again trying to be objective in my rating, even though I personally responded to it quite powerfully. It breaks some rules in terms of literature. But I think if I can remember, I think I gave Atlas Shrugged like a C plus or a B minus. I think I gave it a B minus. But no, the Fountainhead gets an A. It does. The Fountainhead gets an A. The only reason why this doesn't get the full on A plus rating is because of the kind of funky punctuation at times. Like there are commas in here just used in places commas should not be used. It kind of breaks up the sentences at some points, and you're kind of perplexed as to why it reads the way it does. But really, that's the only real thing that I really had to complain about was that. By and large, it is a very well written book, much better written than a lot of people would give it credit for, because a lot of people just trash Ayn Rand's books based on their disagreement with her ideas. Which I mean, you don't have to, but like objectively speaking, again, this is not a badly written book at all. It is. It is quite honestly a better and more impressive book than the vast majority of writers will ever produce. So yeah, I'm giving it an A. I'm giving the Fountainhead an A. Um, Now the Fountainhead has had quite a sizable legacy in its own right, just like Atlas Shrugged, I guess, has had a larger legacy and impact. But the Fountainhead um, has definitely had an impact and legacy in its own right. Aside from any ideological ramifications, it really served to bring um, the trade of architecture to the public awareness much more than it had been. I think a lot of architects I've heard really tout this book. Uh, um, they really kind of align with it. They really respond to it well. But also, it was adapted into a film in 1949, I think, with Gary Cooper as Rourke, with the screenplay written by Ayn Rand herself, and that constitutes Ayn Rand's one real success in Hollywood, penning the screenplay for the adaptation of her own book. Now, while the Fountainhead movie was kind of panned upon its initial release, in the years since its release, it has seen a real critical reevaluation, and now it is a very highly acclaimed film, actually. And also, the director Zack Snyder, director of 300 and Man of Steel, it's been a lifelong passion project for him to make another adaptation of The Fountainhead, and he has really wanted to make this novel into a movie of his own. I don't think that this story would suit his style at all. I don't see how you could use slow motion and gratuitous violence in a story about an architect, but maybe he could pull it off as well. It's been referenced quite a bit. I think Donald Trump actually referenced this book at some point in one of his campaigns. It has had a palpable impact in the public consciousness, um, and yeah. So to leave, I mean, before I leave you and wrap up, I would like to read some excerpts out of this, of just a few, because again, this book, much like Atlas Shrugged, as hated as it may be, I think there's some real value to it. And one part of it that really um, jumped out at me was here on page 492. And this is kind of just to give a little bit of background on context. Dominique Francone and Gail Wyman have just seen a play after Rourke has been viciously attacked in the media, and they've seen a play that is absolute crap, but it was pushed by the media um, because of its because it because of its lack of quality, in other words, and uh, it's kind of meant to denigrate quality by the fact of its own lack of quality. If that makes sense. Again, you just have to read the book, I guess, to get it. But there's a line that in this section right here that really struck me, and it kind of harkens back to what I said about Atlas Shrugged and like how pathetic evil actually is if you see it as it actually is. And it says, it was a contest without time, a struggle of two abstractions, the thing that had created the building against the things that made the play possible. Two forces suddenly naked to her in their simple statement, two forces that had fought since the world began, and every religion had known of them, and there had always been a god and a devil. Only men had been so mistaken about the shapes of their devil. He was not single and big, he was many and smutty and small. That again, I'll just let you kind of ruminate on that, but I think that is true. Evil is kind of like Hannah Arendt's thing, the banality of evil. That evil isn't necessarily some grand, like, sinister boogeyman. It's petty and small, and it kind of becomes truly dangerous through aggregation. I think that's something that the other book also kind of showed me. But beyond just that, we have over here on page, I think it's 606. Um, yes. Okay, so Howard Rourke. This is a conversation in which they're kind of bandying about the relationship between Rourke and society at large, and why people are geared to hate Rourke because he defies them in every possible way. And it says, I think your second-handers understand this, try as they might not to admit it to themselves. Notice how they'll accept anything except a man who stands alone. And you can take that to the bank. That is absolutely true. They recognize him at once, by instinct. There is a special, insidious kind of hatred for him. They forgive criminals. They admire dictators. Crime and violence are a tie, a form of mutual dependence. They need ties. They've got to force their miserable little personalities on every single person they meet. The independent man kills them because they don't exist within him, and that's the only form of existence they know. Notice the malignant kind of resentment against any idea that propounds independence. Notice the malice towards an independent man. Look back at your own life, Howard, and at the people you've met. They know, they're afraid, you're a reproach. Well, the main theme of the Fountainhead is individualism, but it's what she really goes in depth into is how important it is not to seek validation from outside yourself. Now, it's not to say that you shouldn't, take into consideration valuable information if other people have it, but what she's saying is throughout the book, and again says quite eloquently throughout the book, is that a lot of people, the majority of people, have their existence in other people. And that's rather dangerous, because you don't really have a strong sense of yourself that way, and it fosters a kind of dependence, which is what she was pointing out in that passage. That even if you're hating another person because they defy you in some way, that is still a kind of need, because if, like with Rourke, they can't see themselves in Rourke because he's just like a brick wall who doesn't give any kind of a shit about what anyone thinks about him, but that evinces a kind of need in others to destroy what defies them. And because they're so dead set on, destroying Rourke, it shows how weak and petty they actually are because they're not comfortable in themselves. And again, I think that's pretty true. Honestly, there is nothing that will piss some people off than somebody who doesn't need them, who stands alone and doesn't care about their views, their opinion. Yeah, that can get under some people's skin. But then over here on page 638, 636, 635, sorry, I think. So there comes a point in the book where the character of Ellsworth Toohey is talking to the character of Peter Keating, and he is having a rare moment of candor where he's basically just laying it all out there about what his actual goals are and how insidious he really is. And it is, again, I think quite prescient. Um, Not only how Ayn Rand knew that the media could be used to poison people's minds, but also the way that he says that you have to go about enslaving people, the way you have to go about dominating them. And it says, hang on. You, the world. It's only a matter of discovering the lever. If you learn how to rule one single man's soul, you can get the rest of mankind. It's the soul, Peter, the soul. Not whips or swords or fire or guns. That's why the Caesars, the Attilas, the Napoleons were fools and did not last. We will. The soul, Peter, is that which can't be ruled. It must be broken. Drive a wedge in, get your fingers on it, and the man is yours. You won't need a whip. He'll bring it to you and ask to be whipped. Set him in reverse, and his own mechanism will do your work for you. Use him against himself. Want to know how it's done? See if I ever lied to you. See if you haven't heard all this for years but didn't want to hear. And the fault is yours, not mine. There are many ways. Here's one. Make man feel small. Make him feel guilty. Kill his aspiration and his integrity. That's difficult. The worst among you gropes for an ideal in his own twisted way. Kill integrity by internal corruption. Use it against itself. Direct it toward a goal destructive of all integrity. Preach selflessness. Tell man that he must live for others. Tell men that altruism is the ideal. Not a single one of them has ever achieved it, and not a single one ever will. His every living instinct screams against it. But don't you see what you accomplish? Man realizes that he's incapable of what he's accepted as the noblest virtue, and it gives him a sense of guilt, of sin, of his own basic unworthiness. Since the supreme ideal is beyond his grasp, he gives up eventually all ideals, all aspiration, all sense of his personal value. He feels himself obliged to preach what he can't practice. But one can't be good halfway or honest approximately. To preserve one's integrity is a hard battle. Why preserve that which one knows to be corrupt already? His soul gives up its self respect. You've got him. He'll obey. He'll be glad to obey because he can't trust himself. He feels uncertain. He feels unclean. That's one way. Here's another. Kill man's sense of values. Kill his capacity to recognize greatness or to achieve it. Great men can't be ruled. That, again, you can take that to the bank right now. People of true integrity, true greatness, you can't dominate them. You can either kill them or you have to just corrupt their own higher qualities from within. But true people of true integrity and true greatness, you can't rule. They can either only be killed or corrupted. Don't deny the conception of greatness, destroy it from within. The great is the rare, the difficult, the exceptional. Set up standards of achievement open to all, to the least, to the most inept, and you stop the impetus to effort in all men, great or small. You stop all incentive to improvement, to excellence, to perfection. Laugh at Rourke and hold Peter Keating as a great architect. You destroyed architecture. Build up Lois Cook and you've destroyed literature. Hail Ike and you've destroyed the theater. Glorify Lancelot Clokey and you've destroyed the press. Don't set out to raise all shrines. You'll frighten men. Enshrine mediocrity and the shrines are raised. Now that, again, I don't think that can be argued. We live in a world of enshrined mediocrity. We live in a world where every Little League ball player gets a trophy, whether they win or lose, because we don't want anybody to feel bad. We live in a world where morbidly obese models grace the covers of magazines because we want to be inclusive and tolerant. And so we degrade higher ideals and values because some people don't meet them. That is one of the most valuable things this book, or really just Ayn Rand in general, can offer, is just how petty people are and how the sight of greatness brings out their own insecurities. And what's so interesting about this book, in particular, interesting about kind of the character of Ellsworth Toohey, is the nature of his self, or rather the lack thereof. Toohey confesses in the book that he doesn't really have an ego. He doesn't really have a self. He doesn't really care about himself. He cares only about the masses and moreover manipulating them to be like him. But because he doesn't have a sense of self, he finds his sense of purpose in others, diabolically so. But it's also one of the most insightful things about the book is, or this book, is the way that without a strong conception of self, you're headed for a world of hurt societally. Because if you don't care about what happens to yourself, you won't care about what happens to others. All morality comes from the individual. Morality starts and ends with the individual. For evidence of this, you don't have to look any farther than like the Bible with the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. What that means is that in recognizing your own singularity and recognizing your own individuality, you're recognizing that in other people to say, this is not good for me. Maybe I shouldn't do that to other people. And if you don't have a strong conception of yourself, if you truly don't care what happens to yourself, then why would you care what happens to anybody else? It's like uh, Vladimir Lenin and Fidel Castro. I mean, they were, ostensibly selfless. They were fighting for the masses, the people, and then they had no qualms at all about disposing of a lot of those people, because when the individual is of no importance, then you can do whatever you want, and that is truly one of the most valuable things about this book is just how important it is to have a strong sense of self and to have a strong sense of personal integrity, and moreover to be able to recognize greatness and integrity in others without seeking to undermine that because it wounds your own insecurities. So yeah, I've gone on long enough. The Fountainhead, I'm giving it an A. This is a knockout of a book, or this is a true uh, masterpiece of a book, just as a book. I mean, even regardless of the ideology of the book, however you feel about that, this is truly a knockout of a book. So, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Have you read The Fountainhead? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything that I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read The Fountainhead, like I said, with Atlas Shrugged, I'm not going to recommend that you read this because I'm not trying to just foist I wouldn't ever try to just foist this book upon you and say you really need to read The Fountainhead or you really need to read Atlas Shrugged. No, but I will say this: if you're curious and you want to read a book by Ayn Rand, I would say this is the one. Like, if you just want to see what Ayn Rand could do at her best, and see what all the fuss is about. I would say The Fountainhead is where you want to go because it succeeds not only as philosophical literature, but it succeeds as literature first and foremost. It's a good book. Not really much to complain about, I don't think, with it. So I could recommend it, but only if you're just wanting to read one of her works. Anyway, so yeah, as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I anticipate maybe some of the thumbs down button getting hit on this one, but what the hell? Who cares? But again, as always, until next time, peace.